Well, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everybody. I wanted to thank you for joining our presentation today and welcome you. My name is Michael Haru. I am the Chief USA Representative for Tractus Asia. I'm based in Southern California, and I'll be acting as your moderator today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you could please mute your mic or turn your mic off, we'd appreciate that. We will be having a Q&A session following the presentations and discussion, so please submit your questions into the chat box and we will address those again after the session is concluded with our speakers. And just as a note, this webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing it with you afterwards. So we have a very balanced presentation prepared for you today with perspectives and experience from three experts who have a combined experience base of over 75 years of doing business in China. We thought this was an appropriate time to have this discussion, and really present right now is really the time to be evaluating your China strategy, whether that is staying in China for opportunities in the domestic market, whether you're exiting or considering exiting due to trade tensions and political risks and other costs, or if you just see China as part of your global supply chain strategy. So with that, I wanted to go ahead and introduce our speakers. We have with us three gentlemen. Our first is Robert Daudt, who is the founder and managing partner of ChinaPlus Capital. He's going to be discussing why China is still a leading place to do business. Following him will be Dwight Nordstrom, who is the chairman of PRI, and he will be going into discussion about when China is not a place to do low-cost manufacturing business. And then lastly, we'll have John Evans, who's the co-founder and managing director of Tractus Asia. He'll be discussing why companies are doubling down on China right now or looking for new alternatives in South and Southeast Asia. So with that, we thank you for joining us. We hope this is an interesting and topical discussion, and I'm going to turn it over to Robert Daudt. Robert.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate the chance to talk a little bit about my favorite subject, doing business in China, and I'm going to take a little bit of a contrarian viewpoint today, a viewpoint that may seem to many as strange if you read the U.S. press and what's going on in the seemingly tenuous U.S.-China geopolitical news. It may seem a little bit strange to be leading this charge here, but I still believe there are many opportunities in China, and I want to elongate on that a little bit. I started a joint venture in China 22 years ago, and have seen a lot of changes. Have the opportunities changed? Certainly. Have a lot of the opportunities disappeared? Yes. Are there new opportunities? Yes, as well. 20 years ago, it was a relatively easy equation in terms of being over there. You multiplied your labor costs if you were a manufacturer by about 0.1, add some logistical costs, and voila, it made a lot of sense. I think Dwight and John will add a lot in terms of that road here after me here. But it was a different model in those days. Has it ever been an easy place to work? No. Has there been a completely level playing field? No. Has it been a place where people have made money? Yes. Has it been a place where people have lost money? Yes. But I'd like to talk today about some of the current opportunities and mechanisms for success in what I call the new normal in China. But let me kind of premise that with three givens. China's still there. China's still China. It's a big player. The economy is still the economy, and it's growing faster than most other places. And the consumers are still the consumers. There's a strong consumer strength in China. They've rebounded from COVID quicker than most, and if you're over there, it is business as usual in China right now. They are back on track. They were able to control the COVID just because it is China in a little different fashion, and they're back at it. What are the markets like? What are the consumers like? What is the competition like? It's like it was a year ago. It's competitive, it's cutthroat, but now with a lot of pent-up consumer demand. So, I mean, let's look at the macro numbers here. Through Q2, the economy grew 3.2%. I never believe any of the numbers that come out of Beijing, but based on World Bank data, they're certainly going to have a growth coefficient greater than any other major country. 2, Chinese consumers are going to spend over $2 trillion, 14 trillion RMB this year on retail e-commerce alone, 16% over 2019. China will surpass the U.S. This year, become the largest retail market globally for the first time, $5.07 trillion US dollars. The middle class now exceeds 300 million people. That's bigger than the States or Europe. You can ignore a lot of places on this planet, but you just can't ignore China. Where in the world are you going to find a market with the potential to grow over the next 10 years like China? Limited. So you really have 2 choices here. 1, ignore it, say we're not interested in doing business in China, or you play. And if you play, you've got to play smart. On the interesting thing about China, and we can go on and on about a lot of geopolitical things there, but one thing that is in play is the stability of the country. You've got social stability, you got political stability, and you got relative economic stability. And as you know, business likes predictability, and having stability makes things predictable. And that, I think, coupled with what I call cultural factors in China, is, the emphasis on education, on family, on hard work, is a strong recipe for country success. And that's where I see the strong growth factors, the basis, the foundation for the future growth in China. And the challenge, of course, for a lot of Western businesses that have been over there, particularly from the IP and other perspectives, is China looks out for China. But when you think about it, there's really nothing wrong with that. You look out for your family, a CEO looks out for his business, and a country should be looking out for its growth and well-being. And if you're going to do business in China, you need to look out for your company. I've given a talk quite a number of times to various groups and boards of directors entitled 12 Characteristics of Successful Companies in China. If you'd like a copy, certainly let me know. But a number of those characteristics are all, but the basics still stay the same. But the new normal's added a few things to the list. One, it's absolutely critical that you have a good legal counsel that knows China, good accounting, and a good market entry or advisory firm in China that knows China to assist with market entry, finding a good partner or an acquisition candidate, knows the lay of the land. There have been a lot of changes over there, and you need somebody that knows what they are doing. Number 2, that part of the new normal. The border restrictions have certainly complicated and slowed down due diligence in terms of acquisitions or finding new partners, site inspection, negotiations, that sort of thing. But Zoom has taken its place, and though it's slower, it is working, but it is complicated a bit there. One of the things I find interesting in our business, we start out doing a lot of market entry, acquisitions, joint ventures. My first company there was a cooperative joint venture 22 years ago. But then we started doing a lot of outbound by Chinese, and that's dried up almost to zero here. I saw some numbers last week is down 90% year on year for a lot of reasons. But the inbound is down as well, just because of I think a lot of it is press related, and a lot of it is reality, really. IP protection, we've been hearing about that for a long time. There's a lot of merit in what is going on there and the concerns, but it is getting better. Certainly in Shanghai and the big cities, the courts are understanding the concept of IP. It's actually sometimes going the other way now, where the Chinese are very concerned about their IP. The secret, though, is still, if you're going to be doing business over there, keep the secret sauce somewhere else, if possible, in terms of your IP. Effective January 1st, 2020, there were some new PRC foreign investment laws implementing regulations affecting both Chinese foreign equity joint ventures, Chinese cooperative joint ventures, and WOFE, wholly owned foreign enterprise law. You've got to be in tune with that, because those things have changed really rather dramatically, and a lot of things to the good. A lot of things that have stayed the same. There is a number of cities, a number of economic zones, a number of areas still with promotion funds and incentives that are at play for various types of businesses. It's actually very competitive in terms of areas looking for new business. I always say that China, I think, is more pro-business than many places in the United States. They understand the necessity of really business growth and wealth creation. So you have to pay more attention to what cities and areas are prioritizing those types of industries, and one industry is ours, and you need somebody on the ground there to track those places down. And an issue to look at in that too is, how is the regulatory environment being enforced in those areas? It does vary by area to a large degree. You know, China's never been an easy place to do business, and you just have to be smarter, you have to be proactive, you have to be on top of things in terms of your ability to do it. I just noted from an AmCham Shanghai survey here that 2019 saw 61% of U.S. businesses making a profit, down from 73% in 2017. So not everybody is making money, but I know just firsthand as well that a lot of people are still doing well in China. The key that's always been a key, but I have to emphasize it again, is not only finding the right partner, the right people to work with in terms of your getting going over there, your growth factors over there, but just finding the right Chinese partner. I used to have an analogy, used to tell my daughters the most important decision they made in their life wasn't where they went to school or their first job, it was who they married. And I had to change that a few years ago. I told them, no, I've changed it. The most important decision you make in your life is who your partner is in China. Much easier to get out of, much easier to move forward. But Western brands are still seen as premium, whether it's pharmaceutical, medical devices, biotech, healthy foods. All those industries are flourishing with a Western brand, and if they're structured in the right fashion. Over the next year in China, they are anticipating 20% plus growth in the following industries: medical products. I've been working on a couple of those. Medical services, internet and communication services, logistics, online gaming, online shopping, financial services, alternate fuel, both auto and off-road transport. There is a number of areas that are seeing some phenomenal growth rates, and these growth rates are going to continue. So the bottom line, China is here to stay. China is a player, and if you've got products, services that can fit the market, put on your seatbelt, but do it in the right fashion. So thank you. Thank you. For that, I'm going to introduce Dwight Nordstrom. Dwight's really been a pioneer in China. He's been there for 20 plus years, 25 years, I think. I can state quite unequivocally, I think he knows China as well as anybody that I'm aware of, period. He owns a number of companies over there. You can elaborate on that. I can't think of anybody that's more qualified to talk about doing business in China and in Asia and the issues than Dwight Nordstrom. So Dwight, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction, and for people having your attention, we want to make it as useful as possible. And I would like to do some inductive logic and give specific examples for when China is not the place to do your low-cost manufacturing business on a worldwide level. As you see in the lower right-hand corner, our holding company, we're a family-owned company. We've had now over 25 equity holdings, a couple thousand employees, about typically 25% are engineers. We provide a lot of OEMs in the auto, medical, aerospace, and related markets. We do have a consulting division of 30 people that supports both our own equity holdings as well as third-party customers. COVID-19, if you let it, can be a wonderful time to make strategic decisions that will affect your company for decades to come. And I encourage you not to waste this crisis, this opportunity. So I will come with, when is China? We still have most of our operations in China, but when is it not the right place? Well, first of all, China has gone from early 1990s, as Bob referred to, as a low-cost labor cost to now it's a middle labor cost. And for those that do the correct type of balance sheet accounting, you need to put in severance cost that add to any acquisition, any closure. It's a significant thing. As a brief statement that needs to be parsed for specific countries and other parts of ASEAN, but labor costs in China are about 2 times as high as other places. And if you've got products or products in particular that need a high labor cost, one that you need to manage. Secondly, it now appears, no matter what administration comes into the U.S. here early next year, that import duties are a thing that will stay to some extent. In most cases right now, it's over 50% of the goods made in China have significant import duties, 15 to 25% coming to the U.S., as well as now U.S.-made product going back to China, which many of you may not have experienced, but we do a lot of supply of parts made in the U.S. to China, and it's really hurt our business, particularly in high-speed rail. And then the third area, when your gut just says it's when you face competition from state-owned enterprises, one of the extreme negatives that has a much bigger impact on the Chinese growth rate than even the U.S. import duty. And I think emergingly Europe's going to put either quantitative restrictions on volume of trade or import duties themselves within the EU, is the rise of the state-owned enterprises. My first factory was 1983 in China. At that point, over 90% of Chinese GDP was related to state-owned enterprises, as defined as the government has some ownership in the entity. That dropped down to 40% in 2010. Today, I think the best data indicates that number's above 60%. We know that SOEs, even using Chinese suspected data that Bob mentioned, Chinese SOEs are less than half as efficient, 40% continually lose money, and the drag on the Chinese growth rate with inefficient state-owned enterprises is playing, unfortunately, an increasingly contributive role. And when you face them in, for instance, specialty chemical markets or other areas where they come into your market, it's probably time to exit in terms of face-to-face competition. SOEs operate under different market rules than what we operate on. So on the first, I wanted to talk about 3 examples of our ownership. One, we had a factory, 15 years in existence, over 100 employees, making very high-tech electronic control modules for combustion operations. We're a 100% supplier. Unfortunately, that division did not diversify, but we're talking it was a healthy $8 figures per year. But after 2 years of paying import duties of 25% as it went up, our customer, and this is electronic products, so 70% of my cost of goods sold are in purchase of component parts that are spec'd out. The decision was made, we can't keep paying 25% U.S. import duty. And that operation, we had to, the production actually moved out to another ASEAN country. And we did just recently close that facility down. We were able to sell the assets via equity sale for building and land. But, you know, for us, it was a loss and very sad. one of the lessons among many we've learned is you need a local market when you have a China operation. So that's just one. The second one, if you look in the upper right-hand corner of this slide, that's one of our factories we own 100% of in South China. That operation will ship about 400,000 shower doors per year. With our U.S. tech partner, we are the #1 digital supplier to Home Depot and Lowe's. That operation historically has sourced 100% of its component parts, and it's also a high cost of goods sold with glass and related. That operation, we are keeping it there. In fact, we recently doubled down and put in US dollar 7 figures for new facility and automation equipment to offload some of the labor costs. But additionally, we've begun an initiative to look at sourcing in other parts of the world, and including ASEAN, as a means to potentially minimize what appears now only a portion of our products have the import duty in the U.S., though unfortunately we think that may change, and all of them now will have import duty sometime in the near-term future. A third illustration, if you look in the lower left-hand corner, is a $5+ million investment we're looking at in a new auto part technology. The raw material came out of China. At least 60% of the world's supply of this raw material comes out of China. We initially were going to put the plant in China. We're all set up to do that last year. And as we looked at our primary market being major OEMs here in the US, we said we can't afford a 25% import duty. It has a high intellectual property rights related to it, and so we set up in the Philippines. Next slide, please. Thank you. And John, we're just about done. So why do you manufacture within Asia but outside of China? One is intellectual property rights protection is typically better in other countries. The fact that I think for the next decade, and in my analysis, if you're looking at who's moved it more, the current US administration or Xi Jinping and the CCP, I think CCP is the one that's mostly to be fundamentally responsible for what's happening. I think that's still going to be an issue no matter what happens in the US elections. The trade tariffs of 25%. You want to be close to China still for sourcing. There's so many things that China does so well, particularly if you want to access the China market. Having an Asian low-cost assembly or sourcing operation makes sense. And as Bob said, I think if you're looking at outside of China, definitely go with people who've done their homework in the past on due diligence. Take a lot. Really, $1 spent now is worth 20 times than what you pay right now. And it may just be COVID-19. As my comment to people is, you need to look at this time and say, okay, this is the time we make the change. And so thank you very much. And I want to introduce you to John Evans. John has done a wonderful work in Asia, calling us from Thailand today. And thank you, John.
Thanks, Dwight. It's always a pleasure to follow up on with discussing things after two such talented colleagues and friends as Bob and Dwight. You know, we had two really interesting perspectives. You know, Bob is very much pro-China in terms of the market opportunities and what's happening there. And as you could see, some of the investments that Dwight has had have been impacted pretty negatively with some of the crises and increasing risks that doing business in China has brought in the last few years. And so I kind of want to straddle both of those and talk about what types of companies, both our clients and others, are doubling down on investments in China, and you know, what is happening in terms of companies moving. And so Dwight said it a couple times. He talked about you know, the COVID break, I think is really how you alluded to it, is a time for strategic decision making. And I would argue that the strategic decision making at the C-suite, particularly for US multinationals, has been a little bit in paralysis. During the China, the pre-China US trade tensions, we saw increasing costs in China. We saw the advent of the trade war, and most C-suites sat on their hands and said, well, this will go away. Then with the agreement on the phase one resolution to the trade tensions, there was optimism that the tariffs would go away when the Chinese met their obligations, and along comes COVID and interrupts that. And so risk has been something that has been rearing its ugly head and has become a much more important part of your strategic decision making. And I would second what Dwight said, that right now is the time when you should be making decisions. And if you are focused on exports out of China, you probably are already bleeding money, or you're very close to doing so. On the other hand, if you're looking for domestic market and growth, as Bob was talking about, China is a great place to be. And so if you think about what drives business, it's being driven by revenue growth and new markets, which on a global perspective has really decreased in this last year, 2020. And then how do you maintain profit levels when your revenue is going down? It's really extremely difficult. And then how are you going to continue to manage risk, as risk seems to be a much more important, or at least more relevant thing that's being analyzed in company strategies. So what we're seeing as the leading Asian site selection firm is that our global clients are really looking at strategies, not just China specific, not ASEAN specific, not even ChinaPlus, but they're reevaluating their manufacturing distribution across the globe, and they're looking at what will the trends be and what is going to drive our business. And the first and foremost is the access to their consumers. And then we're seeing investments go in with smaller footprints, higher automation, higher number of technology workers, and it's going near market. So whether that's Mexico or North America, or the US for North American market, whether it's Eastern Europe for Europe, whether it's China for China, which I'll talk about here in a minute, or ASEAN for both an export blend in the ASEAN market, in India for a domestic market, as well as exports, you're seeing much smaller facilities, and you're seeing new technology innovations and leaps. So now specifically about Thailand, Bob had a slide and he showed how COVID was managed so well. You may agree or disagree with how China did it, but the reality is China within 1 quarter clamped down on its economy, was able to effectively put the virus in a stranglehold and resuscitate the economy, and that was demonstrated in Bob's numbers. Nowhere else in the globe do you see the combination of the management of COVID and the potential economic turnaround as fast as you do in China. Then when you look at what Bob was talking about, the world's second largest economy and a consumer-driven economy, if I'm sitting in a C-suite, whether that's in the US or Europe, I have to be thinking about where am I going to see growth in the near future, in the midterm. It's going to be in China. It's going to also be in other countries in Asia, which have managed COVID well, but China is by far still the largest driver of that. And what we're seeing is really interesting. We're seeing increased investments and interest in technologies, applied technologies, whether it's automation, manufacturing, AI. We're seeing some environmental tech, the med tech, which there's of course been a big push to pull back into the US, also has tremendous market in China. And so we have several clients right now that are looking at med tech investments. We had several clients in the last year that doubled down on their electronics components manufacturing, but it was all for domestic demand. And these clients were evaluating, should they move some of the production outside of China, and yet the market in China was driving that decision to stay in China. So if you look at that graph there, it's hard to read the numbers, but if you look at the left side of it, it's 2019, and that's foreign direct investment into China. And then it just dropped off in 2020, both because of the trade war, of course, and then COVID. But look how fast through August, it's already rebounding. And I think most people don't realize how much money is flowing back in. We are routinely being contacted by companies that are either interested in exploring the Asian markets with a focus on China, or looking at China specifically. We have a lot of food processing companies right now that are looking to both feed China's appetite, pun intended, and make investments to be able to bring the raw materials from the rest of the world and process in country. So I'm actually quite bullish on where China is going to be in terms of driving investment if you're focused on a domestic market. Switching over to the ChinaPlus one in ASEAN. Again, a lot of the countries, Vietnam being probably the leader, Thailand close behind it, have managed COVID pretty well. And so there is a relatively safe operating environment. Doesn't mean the economies have rebounded. Thailand's economy is down significantly. Much of it, almost 20%, is driven by tourism, which with borders closed, of course, you can understand how that's being impacted negatively. But there have been significant investments that have come into the region. We have, as a couple of examples, Pegatron here is a major mobile phone and electronics components manufacturer. They announced $1 billion investment. The Japanese construction equipment maker Komatsu, interestingly, shifted into Vietnam as well as back into Japan based on some incentives that the Japanese government put forward. And then Bosch was recently announced building a facility in Penang, Malaysia for the semiconductor industry, where there's quite a cluster and hub. And those are just some of the announcements that have been out there in the news. Some of our clients that I can't talk about in detail are looking not only at Vietnam, but across the region for their major export bases for not only the world, but also for the growing demand in Asia. The country where I think that is getting some of the most interest, but not yet some of the investment, is India. It's really emerging as an attractive investment destination. And during the Modi regime, the administration has done, for the first time, actually executed massive investments in both soft and hard infrastructure to support transportation, logistics, telecommunications, and they're building out that manufacturing base. They recently announced an additional incentives and promotion package, I believe, to the tune of about $23 billion, which is really focusing on the plan to become the next China. Now, whether they can become the next China or not, I mean, China's pretty unique, and I would be a little skeptical of that. But what they can do is they can leverage that 1.3 billion population, a growing domestic demand, to imitate some of what China has done in terms of having production locally that can be balanced between domestic consumption and export. While the regulatory environment is tough, there have been changes to the tax laws, there have been changes to the bureaucracy there, and it's getting much easier. Some of, I think, the largest investors that have really put India sort of on people's radar screen are the recent announcements in the past year in the mobile phone industry and the computer industry. There was in 2019 a real focus by the electronics sector that supports these to stay in China because its efficiencies. Then the trade war and COVID has pushed it to look at elsewhere. And so whether it's Apple or Samsung or Foxconn, who have announced billions of dollars of investment, that's really getting the world to look at, can India support manufacturing? And the reality is it can. We have several clients that we're working with on the automotive side, on the automation side. Aerospace is a big driver of investment into India because they're, particularly with the US, there's some treaty applications that make defense and aerospace effective there. And then there have been equity investments into local companies like Geo here, which is Reliance's technology platform, which has received investments from Intel, Facebook, and Google, to name a few. So Make in India is on the rise. I think you're going to see continued investment there. And to wrap it all up, you need to be looking at your investments not only on a global basis, but for China, and for each region, for its own market, with then supplemented by exports. And with that, I'm finished, and we're looking forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That was extremely thoughtful and well said. So appreciate all the comments and presentations. Just to go into Q&A, I don't have these specific for any one particular speaker, but maybe all of you can chime in on it. The first question I had was, there's talk and political pressure for reshoring to the U.S. Which industries / products, if any, are the most likely to be affected?
Well, I could start a little bit because I mentioned that there's of course been the push right now during COVID to move the healthcare, whether it's medical equipment, supplies, PPE, but even pharmaceuticals there. That's a lot harder to do than it is to say. And many states are starting to put in incentives and promotional packages to attract those industries. I think they will have some success on it. We may even see some federal level mandates to do so. I also think just from a manufacturing base, we had already seen during the China trade war a lot of what Dwight was talking about and relocating to Mexico. So nearshoring versus reshoring, particularly in the automobile industry and electronics. And then I'll give a surprising example. I have a friend who recently, about a year ago, established a home textile. So think sheets and towels and things in Virginia, almost completely automated. Their cost per goods sold is equal to what they were doing in China previously, and it's right in the market. So those leaps in technology and automation are going, with the incentives that U.S. states are offering for investments, are changing the sort of financial returns that you can get.
Yeah, and Michael, less than 10% of the companies that have left China have gone back to the U.S. So it's like in 4th or 5th position, depending upon what database you use for reshoring or leaving China manufacturing for other locations.
Gotcha. Thanks, Dwight. Robert, I think you're on mute.
Sorry to echo Dwight's comment as well. We're not seeing a reshoring, but we're seeing a movement. If it's not nearshoring, it's going to be in ASEAN somewhere. That's where the growth is for the next decade. So.
Great, thank you all for that. The next question we had was kind of an interesting one. It says, with the increased political tensions and more aggressive maneuvering of the China central government, how safe is it to send U.S. employees on coordination visits to China right now? Dwight, you can start.
No. Yeah, we have quite a few non-nationals in China. First of all, I don't know of anyone going to China from outside of China that's not planning to stay there for at least 4 more months. The 2-week mandatory quarantine, which is rather draconian, does not appear to be going away. There's a few cities that some people who have residence permits who are going to stay there for a week or have like the second 7 days in their apartments, but still strict quarantine. No one is going to China for a short-term visit of less than 4 months that I'm aware of. And I'd love to be corrected on that. It would actually show me some interesting things. So you're faced with many people relying upon webinars, video to look at their sourcing or their markets. And I'll just tell you, that's a mistake. You need to have in-person visits at some point. I anticipate there will be increasing quality problems of product sourced from China if it's just done virtual.
Let me add to that. I'm actually in Denver right now. I'll be going back to China in about 3 weeks. I have absolutely no concerns in terms of safety. I've been running around there for 22 years. It's safer there than it is in downtown Denver, period.
Thanks, Robert. John, any final comments on it?
I was going to say I couldn't agree more with what both of the gentlemen have said, and I just wanted to build on one of the things that Dwight said. One of the benefits we've had is having 9 offices in the region is that companies that are evaluating multiple locations, they need people on the ground because they can't travel. That 14 days is the same in Thailand. It's the same in Vietnam. You need approvals. You have to get, if it's not weeks, months in advance, and then a limited number of flights. So right now, you really do need on-the-ground resources more than you ever have before.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. Here's another question from the audience. We are in the fashion jewelry business and have manufacturing partners in China to service the China market. We're looking at adding other partners to avoid tariffs into China. Do you have any insights on the growth potential or obstacles for the jewelry market in China? Kind of a specific one there.
Yeah, I could actually answer that because we've had a handful of jewelry clients in China. I don't think I should answer it in a public venue, but if you would like to follow up and have that discussion offline, we do have several jewelry clients both in China and the region. I'd be happy to provide some insights into that.
Okay, I'll make sure to send that note to you, John. Thanks.
And Michael, my wife says I know nothing about jewelry given our long marriage history, so I better not.
Understood. Another question. This is kind of, it's an interesting one. So there's a lot of pro-foreign investment policy going on in China. However, is China even close to being a level playing field? Hey, Robert, you can start with that one.
Yeah, let me take that. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, it's really never been a level playing field. It's always been a difficult place to work. The issue is there is a lot of changes that have been going on in terms of foreign investment. A lot of things that on the surface appear to give a lot more freedom, a lot more impetus in terms of your investment in China. I think it's to be seen how strong these measures really are. And again, that goes back to you've got to be smart in terms of what you're doing, who you're working with, and where you're going over there.
I would like to add, thanks, Bob. I'd like to add two things. From a market perspective for OEMs, so we sell medical parts, auto parts to tier 1, tier 2. China is a great, still open place to get business. However, it's not a level playing field because over 50% of the economy is connected to state-owned enterprises. They're not efficient. They play differently. If you're trying to compare that to other parts of ASEAN, I'm sorry, China right now has fallen to the lower tier in terms of incentives for being in quote unquote let the best company win, best technology win. So that's a problem.
Okay, thank you. You guys all kind of touched on this, but one of the questions was, there's lots of news about companies leaving China. What types of businesses are still entering? I mean, you guys all kind of touched on that, but if there's any, if you want to expound on that, anything in particular? I mean, John, you kind of touched on it already.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just recap it. Applied technologies are coming in. New technologies are setting up manufacturing where it's not as cost competitive, and then food processing. We have several ongoing projects and several more that are interested in looking at the China food processing market. And then the companies that are there that need additional capacity tend to be investing in China versus moving it if it's domestic demand driven, but not necessarily new market entrants.
I concur with John on that. Actually, we're working with a couple of things, but it's domestically driven. Got a very large Western assisted living facility that we think has a very good opportunity to be successful in China. We're working with I guess related to the food, but it's a healthy food, diabetic type preventive food medication that we're working with over there that is selling off the shelves, quite frankly. And we've got a high-tech fabric company that is generating a lot of interest over there in China as well. So, but it's all domestically driven, and I think they'll do well there.
So, Bob, I just want to sort of do a counterpoint.
Yeah.
I would argue that the domestic, if you have domestic buyers of international equity in China, you got a problem with people being able to pay.
That's correct. That's correct. It's always got, there's always something. And it's obviously more to solve, more problems to solve, but it's, you know, it's not easy. But we still think there's a potential for a good deal of revenue. So.
Okay, next question is a little bit more political than it is strategic and business related, but it's concerning China's kind of aggressive behavior militarily, obviously with the taking over of Hong Kong or reassuming control of Hong Kong, and perceived threats against Taiwan and continued activities in the South China Sea. How concerned should we be in considering potential activities in China with regards to that? It's kind of a loaded question.
Who wants to touch that one?
Well, I like telling actual examples. So just a few months ago, there was a major aircraft component part. The winner of that was a U.S. operation versus Taiwan. These are typically 10-year purchase contracts. 5 to 10 years, it's not going to be a 10-year. And a major reason for the winning of the U.S. side over Taiwan was looking at the next 10 years, the political risk analysis was there's probably a 20% chance that mainland China will do some blockade or something else of Taiwan for some period of time. And if this is a must-have component part, we can't rely on it coming from Taiwan. So Taiwan faces issues that I would say other ASEAN countries, the risk is lower. It is interesting that just last week, the new security law that China implemented in the summer in Hong Kong, there was a small protest, nonviolent, in front of the Chinese embassy in London, and the Chinese government made an official request for criminal prosecution. Talk about, arms reach, extra-jurisdictional thing, that these people were violating the Hong Kong security.
Interesting. Thanks, Dwight. John or Bob, do you guys have any additional comments?
I'll add a little bit. I mean, I think political tensions will continue to be a risk that get weighed into location decisions. I'll give a couple of examples. With the Hong Kong situation recently, you're seeing a lot of relocation of headquarters and corporate offices, and they're making two decisions. They're either relocating into the mainland and going to Shanghai or Beijing and occasionally Guangzhou, Shenzhen, because there's no real advantage or a lesser perceived advantage of being in Hong Kong, or they're looking at Singapore, Tokyo, Seoul to mitigate those risks. They're not really looking at Taipei for the reasons that Dwight brought up. And then I think the other thing that's happening is the U.S. foreign policy is very actively engaging with India as a buffer on the west side, and you're seeing investment into strategic sectors, like I said earlier, defense into India, aerospace and defense, that you may have previously seen go into other countries in the region.
It certainly is the geopolitical issue of our time, and certainly the most important relationship in the world right now in terms of what does transpire. And I go back even during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Remember, Cargill was selling grain to the Russians. So, business does go on.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I don't see any more new questions coming in. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining the webinar. If you had any final thoughts or questions, you can surely chime them in. We have a little bit more time. But I thought this was an excellent presentation and some great perspectives from many different angles, and your combined experience is really appreciated. So want to thank you, and on behalf of Tractus, want to thank all of our attendees. Again, this will be recorded, so we will send out a recording of the webinar for those that attended. And if you guys had any final sign-off thoughts, feel free now. Otherwise, we can close it up.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bless you guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks,
Have a great
Mike.
day. All right. Thank you.